do a bit of resawing, as you may have noticed if you watch very many of my videos. I've seen other woodworkers build tall auxiliary fences, and I thought it was past time I build one as well. With the table saw blade fully raised and by flipping boards end to end, I can resaw material just under 6 inches wide. With that in mind, I'm going to build a resaw fence 6 inches tall. I was going to make the fence from 3/4 inch plywood, but I didn't have any on hand, so I settled for 1/2 inch. This will be strong enough for the purpose, but I'll have to settle for holding it together with finishing nails. With 3/4, I would have used screws. I cut the 6-inch wide board first, and it was a little long, so I went over to my radial arm saw and trimmed it to 42 inches. I measured the height of the fence at 2.5 inches, so I cut the next board to that width and also trimmed it to 42 inches long. The last piece will fit across the top of the fence, and I decided on a 5 1/8 width for that part. I wanted a snug fit, but not so tight that I would have to force it into place whenever I wanted to use it. Once the 3 parts of the fence were cut, I laid the top fence on top of the fence, the 2.5-inch tall piece to the right side and the 6-inch tall piece to the left side. I used a pneumatic brad nailer and 1-inch finishing nails, starting with the top at the short side. I nailed the 6-inch tall piece at one end, but the blade guard got in the way of me placing any more nails from that position. When I went to nail that board at the other end, I found it wanted to bow out slightly. I tried to hold it in place, but doing that and holding the nailer in the other hand was just too awkward. I used a clamp to hold the end in place long enough to get that side secured. The easiest way to nail the rest of that 6-inch piece in place was to remove it from the saw and set it on its side. I used a straight edge to draw a line centered on the edge and used the nailer to complete that side. The auxiliary fence is sturdy but not too heavy. There will be no problems putting it on and taking it off as needed. I was at a woodcraft store for a class on CNC machines, as I'm thinking of buying one. Let me know in the comments what you think about CNC. Do you have one? Are you thinking of buying one? Would you be interested in CNC project videos if I purchased a machine? Anyway, while at the store, I noticed this double featherboard on sale, so I bought one. I have a bow feather board already, and I like it and use it whenever I'm making rip cuts. The model I purchased yesterday can either be used as 2 separate boards, or you can insert the spacers and stack them. With the featherboard stacked, you're providing pressure on the board you're cutting to keep it tight against the fence in 2 places rather than just one. When I first opened the box and dumped out the parts, putting this together looked like it was going to take me a while to figure out and put together, so I stopped recording. It turns out the assembly was easy enough for anyone with basic mechanical skills to put together quickly. Apparently, I don't fit in the category of people with basic mechanical skills. I've got the blade guard in place here. I was making regular rip cuts, but I want to make a resaw, do a resaw. So I've got to take the blade guard off of that. On my resaw video, somebody mentioned I should use a splitter. This saw doesn't come with a splitter, so that's why I didn't use one. I double checked with Jet. It's a Jet scroll saw, and they said no, this model doesn't have a splitter. But I bought one. With the new auxiliary fence completed and the double featherboard put together, I'm ready to put the combo to a practical test. I needed some 1/4-inch thick stock for a project, and I chose this 4/4 piece of sapele to resaw. It was 13/16 thick, so I set the blade so the middle of the blade came as close to 13/32 as I could get. The blade is a 1/4-inch thick, so resawing right down the middle will yield 2 pieces that are each 9/32 thick. The cut will be a little rough, so I'll have to run the piece through my thickness planer. If my measuring and setup is perfect and I take off 1/32 at the planer, my stock will be 1/4-inch thick. If I am a little off and the stock ends up a 32nd less than a 1/4 inch, it will still be usable in the project I have in mind. I started with a relatively shallow cut to make sure the featherboard was set up correctly. Notice that the featherboard is placed slightly in front of the saw blade. You want the stock tight up against the fence when the wood starts to cut, but you do not want side pressure on the blade while it's going through the saw. This would set up a dangerous kickback situation. First pass went well, so I flipped the stock end for end and made a cut on the other edge. Since everything was proceeding smoothly, I raised the blade and made 2 more passes. Then I repeated the process until I cut all the way through the board. Because there's no splitter available for this particular jet table saw, I purchased a blank table insert and made a 0 clearance plate. I bought a kit with a 1/4-inch plastic splitter and a jig to set it up properly. If a metal splitter is not available for your table saw, you must use this setup for safety. Otherwise, once you make your cuts, the stock might close back on the curve you just created, causing a kickback. You need to push the stock all the way past the blade with some room for safety before you can lift it up and flip it over to make another cut. I have outfeed rollers for longer pieces, but this was too short to reach the roller. It was, however, long enough to rest on the mechanism that holds the blade guard when it is in place. The new extended fence and featherboard combination gave me better results resawing than I had achieved before. Previously, when I was done with the resaw cuts, there was sometimes a bit of a valley in the middle of the board because the wood wasn't held tightly against the fence. This cut was almost perfect, so it will require only a pass or two at 1/64 each to make the wood ready for use in my next project. If you do or plan on doing any resawing, I highly recommend you build a tall fence attachment like this one. I think the stacked featherboard is a good accessory as well. I purchased mine at a woodcraft store, and I'll leave a link to the stackable featherboard on the Woodcraft website in case there's no store near you. I'd love to read your comments on this video, and I respond to every one as soon as possible. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, and check out the suggestion on the screen for the next video to watch.